There's a house in Beverly Hills worth over $60 million. The man who lives in it doesn't own it. He rents it. He could buy it in cash without blinking. He doesn't. And he's not alone. Some of the wealthiest people on earth, founders, hedge fund managers, tech billionaires, choose deliberately to rent instead of buy. Meanwhile, a schoolteacher in Ohio spends 15 years scraping together a down payment because she was taught that renting is throwing money away. So here's the question nobody explains properly. If owning a home is supposed to be the ultimate symbol of financial success, why do so many genuinely rich people avoid it? The answer isn't about money. It's about how money actually behaves once you have enough of it. For most of the 20th century, home ownership was sold as the finish line of financial life. Buy a house, pay it off, and you've made it. That idea wasn't an accident. It was policy. After World War II, the U.S. government pushed home ownership hard, backing mortgages, building suburbs, and wiring the tax code to reward buyers over renters. It worked. Home ownership became the default measure of success in America. But somewhere in that story, an important detail got lost. A house is not an investment in the way people think it is. It's shelter first and an asset second, and those two roles pull against each other. For a family with modest savings, a home is often the only large asset they'll ever hold, so buying makes sense. It forces savings, provides stability, and locks in housing costs. But once someone has serious wealth, the math flips. And that's where the story gets interesting. Here's the part almost nobody explains clearly. Being rich isn't about having a lot of money sitting still. It's about having money that keeps moving. Every dollar a wealthy person owns is expected to work, to be invested, deployed, or leveraged into something that grows. Economists call this the opportunity cost of capital, the return you give up by putting money into one place instead of another. A $60 million house doesn't pay dividends. It doesn't compound. It doesn't generate cash flow. It just sits there, quietly costing money in taxes, maintenance, and insurance, often 2 to 3% of its value every single year, even before it appreciates a cent. Now compare that to the same $60 million invested in a diversified portfolio of stocks or a private business. Historically, markets have returned somewhere around 7 to 10% a year on average before inflation. Over time, that gap compounds into a staggering amount of missed growth. So when a billionaire rents instead of buys, they're not avoiding real estate because they can't afford it. They're avoiding it because tying up tens of millions of dollars in a non-productive asset is, from a purely financial standpoint, inefficient. Renting, for them, isn't a compromise, it's a strategy. This is where most explanations stop, but the real story is just getting started. To understand why the wealthy avoid ownership, you need to understand two words that quietly run the entire financial system: liquidity and leverage. Liquidity means how quickly an asset can be turned into usable cash. Stocks are liquid. You can sell them in seconds. Real estate is not. Selling a mansion can take months, sometimes years, and comes with steep transaction costs, often 5 to 6% just in fees. For someone whose wealth depends on being able to move fast, buying a stake in a company, backing a new venture, covering a sudden opportunity, being locked into an illiquid asset is a real cost, even if it doesn't show up on paper. Then there's leverage, the ability to use borrowed money to control something bigger than your own cash could buy. The wealthy don't avoid debt. They use it constantly, but strategically. Instead of tying up capital in a house, many high net worth individuals borrow against their investment portfolios at low interest rates, using that cash for anything they need, including sometimes to fund their lifestyle, while their original investments keep growing, untouched. It's a quiet trick most people never hear about. Keep your money invested, borrow cheaply against it, and let compounding do the work in the background. Renting fits perfectly into that system. Buying doesn't. So who actually benefits from the idea that everyone should own a home? Governments benefit because homeowners tend to be more civically invested and are easier to tax through property assessments. Banks benefit because mortgages are one of the most reliable long-term lending products in the entire financial system. Construction, real estate, and home improvement industries benefit because the entire economy around home ownership, appraisals, agents, contractors, insurers, depends on people continuing to buy. And the middle class does often benefit too, especially when a mortgage forces disciplined saving and shelters someone from rising rents over decades. But here's the myth versus reality gap. The emotional story we're told, owning is always smarter than renting, was built for a middle-class audience in a specific economic era, and it got generalized into a universal truth. It isn't one. It depends entirely on what else you could be doing with that money. For someone with a modest income, a mortgage is often the best forced savings vehicle they'll ever have. For someone with an 8 or 9-figure net worth, the exact same logic becomes the exact opposite. Not because the math is different, because the alternative uses of that capital are completely different. Who pays for the myth? In some sense, everyday buyers do, chasing home ownership as the single symbol of financial arrival, sometimes stretching into debt for a house that will barely outpace inflation over the following decade, while missing the compounding growth available elsewhere. Zoom out far enough, and this isn't really a story about houses. It's a story about how capital behaves differently depending on how much of it you have. The same logic shows up everywhere in the economy. Companies like Amazon spent years reinvesting nearly every dollar of profit back into growth instead of holding cash, because idle capital is a cost, not a safety net, when you have access to more of it whenever you need it. Costco doesn't build lavish headquarters. It puts money into inventory turnover and membership growth, because that's where the real return lives. The pattern is consistent. The wealthier the entity, a person, a company, sometimes even a government, the more that entity treats owning as a decision to be justified, not assumed. That's the hidden mechanism behind why the rich rent. It was never really about avoiding homes. It's about what capital is for and whether it's actively working or quietly sitting still, which raises a question that goes beyond real estate entirely. How much of what we consider financial success is actually just capital that stopped moving and started sitting?